Hello and welcome to Chess Chat live from the Rollstone Bank and Trust Studios at Fitchburg Access Television. I'm Dave Kuchar, a member of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University, which meets every Wednesday from 6:30 to 10:30 in the McKay Complex in rooms 163 and 165. I am filling in for George Mirijanian, who is home recovering from eye surgery, and I and everyone at the club wish him a very speedy and successful recovery. This is the 204th episode of Chess Chat. As usual, we have Darren Dame, our award-winning director, in the control room, and he is assisted by Brian Biglow behind the cameras. Brian also sets up the sets here and all the cameras. And since this has never been mentioned before, I'll mention that Brian Biglow is the only person at the Wachusett Chess Club with a winning record against women's U.S. champion Carissa Yip. Across from me is Mike Commisso of Brookline, New Hampshire, who runs all the tournaments at the club and who's filling in for the fourth time. Welcome, Mike.
Evening, Dave. Happy to help.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. So this episode is going to be about the Massachusetts State Open, which determines the new state champion. So that took place 2 weeks ago. And so we have a new state champion. I'll let you say the name.
You got it. Danila Poliannikov.
Right. Who we think he's 21 years old. He was the Massachusetts middle school champion in 2018 and 2019. He was the high school champion in 2022, became a master in February of 2019. All of these notes, by the way, there's a picture of Danila, are courtesy of George, who is, I know, listening at home right now, so hello, George. Let's see, a number of club members competed in the Mass Open. We've got some of their pictures. So, Darren, if you could just start bringing up pictures, we'll talk about. Okay, so right there, that's Mike Urbonis, who's the current Wachusett Club champion. He tied for the top under 1900 prize in the under 2100 section. And we have some other photos. Okay, on the left there, Stephen Smith. I'm not sure how he fared, but he played. Let's see, we have pictures of some others. Dewey, how do you pronounce it?
Win.
Win? Oh, really? That's how you pronounce it? Okay. Dewey Win played at the Mass Open. In this picture, he's playing against Bob Cecino. Who else do we have? Leo Marzorati on the right played in the Mass Open also. Do we have any others? Okay, that's Mariano Rivera on the left, who also played. I think that's about it for the photos of the players from the club who played. Let's see. One of the assistant TDs was Larry Gladding, who's a club member. He hasn't played in a while, but Larry Gladding of Leominster was an assistant TD, as well as Rob King. One of George's notes is that Larry Gladding was the Wachusett Chess Club co-champion in 92 and 98. And Rob King was the champion in 2011. George mentions that the MACA website has a complete list of all the prize winners. We will mention that there were four runners-up. So Danila Poliannikov was the winner, but the runners-up were Alexander Ivanov, who won 15 times previously. He's got a pretty amazing record because he won it first in 1988, and then he won it last year as well. So that's quite a stretch. Yeah. Also tied for second was Denis Shmelov, who's won it twice in the past. And the other two who tied were Eric Fang and Matthew Fishbein. Let's see. George also noted that there were 233 players in 5 sections this year. He said that was a larger turnout than last year. So congrats to Bob Messenger for putting this together. He was the chief tournament director. So we should have plenty of time to present the game, because I was assuming we'd start at like quarter after, but
Stretch.
we're stretched, yeah. So the game we're going to present is the last round game, so round 6. At this point, there were 4 players with 4 points out of 5, and the 4 players were Danila, Joaquin Carlson, Eric Fang, and Denis Shmelov all had 4 points. So Denis Shmelov played Eric Fang, and they had a draw. So they both ended up at 4.5 points. And Danila beat Joaquin Carlson in the game we're going to present to end up with 5 points. So he was the sole winner with 5 points. So this is actually the game that determined the championship. So I guess let's launch right into it. So Danila had white, and he opened with e4, which is the most common opening move. You see it on the screen. So Joaquin
Responded with e6, French defense.
French defense, right. So Danila's second move, which is by far the most common move in the French defense, is d4. And we've said a million times before that if white gets to put both pawns there, you can't go wrong in the opening.
So black followed with d5
Yep,
to challenge that center
yep,
and maybe make a pretty strong light square pawn chain.
yep. So now Danila's third move, there's a lot of choices here in the French defense. We can show some of them. There's the advanced variation with e5 that locks everything up. There's the most usual, which is knight to c3. And there's also the exchange variation where the pawns get traded off right away. A lot of times if white is just hoping to get a draw, he'll do the exchange variation. But Danila played another option, which is knight to d2, which is called
Tarrasch defense.
Tarrasch
or
defense.
variation.
And the reason for doing it is white doesn't want to block the c pawn, and also doesn't want to get the
Right.
knight pinned.
Pin could be kind of annoying. There's
Right, so
very dicey
If
variations.
the knight's here and black does that, then white just blocks that way. So it has its advantages, but the disadvantage is that, it doesn't put any pressure on d5, for example, and it blocks the dark squared bishop. So like everything in chess, every move has its
you
advantages
get
and
something and you
disadvantages.
give.
Yep. So black's third move was,
Well, once again, challenge the center
yep,
from c5. Now both of white's center pawns are attacked,
yep,
and we call that tension. You have to
Right.
see who decides to take or not.
yep. And so Danila takes on d5. And now black's got a choice,
There's
right?
some choices. You might want to take with the pawn to open up this bishop,
Right,
but black chose to take with the queen, keeping this pawn chain.
yep. And it also keeps the pawn structures unbalanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So given that he's tied for first place, black is probably playing for a win here. Because if they had a draw here and the other match had a victor, then they would have finished out of first place. So I'd say all 4 players who are playing in this final round are all playing for a win.
I would imagine.
Whether they're black or white.
Probably not looking for two draws in
Right.
a tiebreaker.
Right. Okay, so Danila's 5th move develops knight to f3, just standard development.
So black replies with c takes d4. Pretty common move here. You'd see it in the Sicilian defense. Basically, the pawn has challenged the center, and now it does something about it.
Yep. And right now, white can't take back yet because the pawn's defended by the queen. So he develops the bishop to c4 and hits the queen. Now the queen's going to be forced to move.
So this is the first move I kind of perked up at when I went over the game, because it seems it's a very timely move, right? White is making the most of moving the bishop by attacking the queen.
Yep.
It's a nice initiative move. I never played this as white, but
Neither
it's
have
nice.
I.
He's got 3 pieces developed, and black better move that queen.
Right, right.
Which he did, backed it up to d6.
Which I think is the most common move in the databases. So right now, white has 3 pieces developed. Black only has 1. On the other hand, black has an extra pawn right now. But white just continues development by castling.
I imagine there are many natural moves here, but black played knight f6. Seems
Yep.
pretty reasonable. It keeps white's knight from hopping into e4 and pestering the queen again, so
Yep.
it's a good idea.
And so now white plays knight to bishop 3. So now he's hitting the pawn 3 times. So he's going to be able to recapture. Black, I guess here, black could, potentially defend the pawn if he wanted, but I think if he did that, white would just play
Absolutely.
rook here, and black would be in a lot of trouble. So
And being a little better developed, maybe even sacrifice something just to
Right.
get it moving.
so
Well,
it's not worthwhile.
Instead of overextending with a pawn move, black played knight c6, guarding the pawn, but like Dave said, it still can be taken.
Right, it's attacked 3 times. It's only defended twice. So now Danila does take back that pawn on d4. And you see it on the monitor, yeah.
Yep. So black probably has some choices, like to bring the bishop up in case
Yep.
there's a trade of the knight, but he just traded the knight directly.
Yep. And white now takes back on d4. So I guess one thing we could point out quickly is that something that happens in the French defense, they call this the problem bishop because it's always stuck behind this pawn. So white's got clear sailing to develop his pieces, but black always has to deal with what to do with this bishop that's always blocked in by putting that pawn on e6.
So he begins by developing it to e7.
No, actually the other. It's the other one.
Oh,
this time.
sorry, e7.
Yeah,
I know
it's okay.
I know the board.
Yep.
It makes sense. He wants to castle and get out of that potential rook to e1
Yeah.
traffic that Dave brought up.
Yeah. Okay, so now white plays pawn to c3, and one of the things that does is it guards the knight, which was previously just guarded by the queen. Now the queen's going to be free to move because the knight's defended.
Black replied with castle, which makes sense, right? You
Yep.
want to get your king safe out of the center.
Yeah.
They're just getting going, so before anything really starts up, get your king safe.
Yeah. So now Danila develops the queen to f3. Like I said, since the knight's guarded, he's free to move the queen to a better square.
So there's a minor threat in that this queen bishop can't move or it will not protect this pawn anymore.
Right.
So to deal with that, black first dropped the queen back to protect that pawn, and then now he could move the bishop if he liked.
And now he's also hitting
He's
the
attacking
bishop.
that bishop. Yep.
So white's 13th move, he pulls the bishop back to safety.
Black sees an advantage to pester that bishop and played a5, maybe play a4 soon,
Right.
maybe kick the bishop around a little bit.
Right. And another thing about doing that is since this bishop is in the way right now, there's a possibility he's going to develop the rook this way, which is called a rook lift. Where are a5? Okay, so now white finishes his development by developing his last piece to g5, bishop to g5. So now he's got his rooks connected, which is pretty much the end of the development phase.
As alluded to, black played a4 and threatened the bishop. Obviously, that bishop needs to move
Right.
because it's more valuable than a pawn.
And he actually is able to move it to c2, which is probably a good square. He'd probably prefer to have it on c2 where it's aiming at the black king. But like we said, but now that the pawn's pushed up, he's got a different way to develop the rook.
Right. He now can lift it all the way to a5
Yeah,
on his 15th move. It attacks this bishop on g5.
right,
It's sometimes hard to see lateral moves like this,
Right.
threats, so it's not like these guys are not going to see this,
Right,
but
yeah.
it's a nice idea.
yeah. And like we said, right now the bishop's in the way. Normally you'd bring the rook over to here, but that bishop, that they call it the French bishop, is in the way. So white has to do something to save the bishop. He moves it back to h4.
And then finally, black develops the bishop to d7. It's got two uses right now. It's off the back rank.
Yeah.
The rooks could maybe connect, and it has a long-range protection of this pawn in case this rook leaves
Right.
protection of it.
Right. So now we've pretty much entered the middle game. Everybody's finished their development. Here Danila plays a3. I think what he's doing is he's just trying to prevent this pawn from getting pushed any further into his position. So he plays a3 to stop black's a pawn.
Black's reply is rook d8. This d file is open, which means there are no pawns on it.
Right.
So he stakes a minor claim to it.
Right. Again, that's standard stuff. You put your rooks on open files or half open files. Now, Danila does the same thing. He plays his rook on the A file to the open D file to challenge it.
So in some variations, not here, not on this position, a bishop dropping back to d8, e8 like this move was, might help lend support to this square, which is usually kind of weak.
Yeah.
But also, he's getting an opportunity to trade off a rook if needed, or
Right.
double rooks by bringing this rook over to d5.
Exactly, yeah. So Danila plays bishop to g3, hitting the black queen on c7.
So obviously it needs to move.
Yeah,
Black played queen b6. It threatens this b2 pawn.
yeah, and actually white ignores that and develops his other rook to the center. Rook on f to e1.
So if black were to go ahead and take this pawn, white could come behind that queen with the rook. The queen
Yeah.
would have to move, and then white could maybe win this pawn. So
Yeah,
it's
and-
not really worth the risk of infiltrating.
Right, and he might get his queen
get
trapped
trapped.
too. So yeah, it's not worthwhile.
Instead, he played rook a to d5. So now black has doubled his rooks
Yeah,
on the d file, and it's a minor pin on this knight, which if it were to move, we might see some trades on
right.
d1.
Yep. So Danila responds with rook to d2 on his 21st move. So now by doing that, he could either double his rooks on the e file that way, or he could double his rooks on the d file that way. He's got the option.
Black replied knight h5. Now that's attacked by the queen, but still protected by this rook on d5.
Right.
But now it attacks this bishop,
Yep.
which is cutting through black's position. It might be nice to eliminate it.
Right. So Danila wants to hold on to the bishop, so he puts it on e5 to save it.
Now what Dave said earlier was interesting is both bishops are aiming at black's king side.
Right.
The rooks are in the center. There's a knight available. It's a little bit, it could be dicey.
Yeah.
In response, black played f6 to kick that bishop out of that post.
Yep. And he responded with the natural move to bring it back to G3, although now it's possible that that could get taken.
Black held off and played bishop c5, putting another attacker on this knight. Still defended twice, but now attacked 4 times.
Yeah. And so here, Danila decides to double on the E file. So he's now got 2 rooks attacking this pawn, which is only defended once.
And the knight attacks.
Oh, and the knight, so he's got 3 attackers. Yep.
Another subtlety here is when this bishop dropped back,
Yep.
it now protects this
Oh,
knight.
right, yep,
So this rook is not overworked to doing just that job.
right, that's a good point.
So that was 24. So now black played e5. There was no way to protect the pawn on e6.
Right.
And so he forces that knight to make a decision about where it would go.
Okay, so this is a big decision here, I'd say, at this point, because Danila plays queen to f5. He's getting his queen into a position where possibly could get trapped. I mean, he's obviously got a threat here of taking the pawn on h7, but it could get dicey.
So in response, Joaquin played bishop to g6,
Yeah,
and that skewers the queen and bishop.
yeah,
They're both bishops protected, so there's no material to lose. But the queen's got to get out of there.
yeah. So this is kind of going to be a key point here. He plays queen to e6 check. And so it was Joaquin's next move. He could have either just interposed the bishop to block the check, or even moved the king away. But what he does is he's going to trade queens,
He
which is
traded queens.
this changes everything now. So he's allowing Danila to put his knight right into the heart of black's position, and
And it
so-
attacks this bishop,
attacks
so
the
there is a
bishop,
way out.
attacks
if
the
it comes to
bishop,
that.
also attacks the rook.
Yep. So that's called a fork. You
Yeah.
do a double attack. Black played knight, takes bishop on g3, which also attacks this rook. So it's like a chain of events.
Yeah. So, as usual, in recapturing, white captures towards the center. That's the usual rule of thumb. It's not always the case, but usually it's best to capture towards the center, which he does.
The other thing about that is that's going to be a trade no matter what, but he still maintains this fork, so it's still in play.
Yep. So 28th move, yeah.
Black plays bishop, takes bishop. Now that means the rook has to.
Yeah,
Roll
so
over.
so we can point out that, this is a crazy complex position.
It's
I
hard.
mean,
It's really rough.
yeah, black has three pieces, or these two are under attack, this is under attack. There's a lot of options here, and this is so complex, there's no way
This
we
one,
can.
I, aside from what you said, the move made, I didn't think about.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I don't think it would have occurred to me. I would have either, taken this bishop or taken that rook,
Right.
or I don't think I would have even thought of this. It certainly complicates things. Is it the best? I'm not sure. But he plays c4, attacking. Yeah, so all of black's pieces are attacked right now. Both of the rooks are attacked, this bishop, all of black's pieces are attacked.
Now,
So
he's got a piece for it so far, but that won't last.
that won't last, right?
So on 29, he decided to keep this bishop with
Save-
bishop to b3.
Save the bishop,
And
yeah.
it also gets on this diagonal and x-rays down to the knight, so maybe he can watch that knight in the future.
Right, and attack this pawn on c4. The variations from here would be insane to look at, but suffice it to say, it's a crazy position. So now, having moved the pawn to c4, he captures the rook on d5. Now we're going to have some exchanges.
So it's a little temporary, but now this knight is protected by a pawn, so that's on
Right.
an outpost.
Yep.
It's a desirable place for a knight to live.
Right.
It might be worth not making exchanges because it's such a good prime real estate.
Right. Right.
And that was 30, and of course, it didn't last long because black took the pawn, and now the knight is not supported by the pawn.
Right. So now Danila takes the bishop on c5. Everything's coming off the board.
Yep. And if he doesn't take back, black must take the knight or else he'll be down. And so we've gone through a pretty complicated situation. Probably there are
Right.
too many variations to name.
Right. So we're already into the end game, which, I mean, in the past, when we had the half-hour chess chat, we could never really get to end games. But now that we've got a full hour, we actually can see some end games. So this is the end game stage, and the overview is that white is up the exchange. So he's got a rook for a bishop. We call that being up the exchange, a rook for a bishop or a rook for a knight. But black has an extra pawn, to compensate for it. All in all, I'd say that white has the advantage here. So let's see, at this point, this is we got a critical point coming up. So what Danila does is put, I hope I'm pronouncing his name
Danila.
right.
Danila.
Danila. George is probably wincing at home. Plays rook to d2 to take over the open file. He wants to penetrate into the position with his rooks. And this, so right now, why don't you talk about his move and what he could have done?
Okay. So he played rook to d5.
Yep.
But he has other choices. He could centralize his king. He could advance the b pawn. He could advance the h pawn.
Or probably the best would be just to,
Block it, and then anchor that bishop on c6 if needed.
right. So he wants to stop him from penetrating, and that, putting the bishop there would have done that.
Now, on the other hand, now white can double his rooks.
Yeah, so I can say that, the computer analysis is that if he had put his bishop here, it's like a dead even game. Yeah, I'm not sure what would have happened. Yeah, if he had done it and black had doubled the rooks. I'm not sure what.
Right. If that happens, the bishop can't be protected, so maybe it anchors on c6.
Yeah.
White could penetrate,
Yeah.
but then the black king could escape through his pawns.
Yeah. But suffice it to say that, according to the computer evaluation, if he had pulled the bishop back, it would have been an even game. But instead he put his rook on d5, and this is offering to exchange, which you typically don't want to do when you're behind in material. So I suspect that Danila just, snapped it right up without a lot of thought. So rook takes d5.
Yeah, we have the times because it was a digital board that
Oh, so you do have one there? Yeah.
that recorded the game.
Yep.
And it was like half a minute,
Half a minute? Yeah.
which is kind of like, I see it, let me just make sure it's not stupid.
Right, right.
That's something I did wrong, and it's not. So
Right.
he snapped it up, and black took back, bishop takes rook.
So from here on in, this is a tough game for black. He's down the exchange. He does have the extra pawn, but this rook is going to become very active. So Danila plays this very well from here on out. His next move is rook to d1, hitting the bishop, and he's going to force his way into black's position.
Black has a bit of a problem because he can anchor the bishop on c6 and protect it, but he has no way with that bishop to attack any of white's dark square pawns. And so he's going to be in a defensive stance.
Right, right. And now, white plays f4. So for one thing, he's he's giving black the chance to exchange, which would undouble his pawns. But he also creates an avenue for his king to start getting into the game, which, again, past episodes of Chess Chat, we never got to endgames. So one of the things about endgames is that the king becomes like an offensive piece now. The king doesn't have to worry about getting checkmated. So now the king is actually can be used as an offensive piece. So that's important in the endgame.
Especially here, white's king can stay on the dark squares, and this bishop can never attack it.
Yep.
So he's free to roam all the way across the board.
Yep.
The engine computer evaluation offered f4 as a move before the rook moves.
Yep.
And I think it was to try to just break up the position, break up the pawn chain right here, while both rooks were still on. That probably would have left a target for the white rooks.
Yep.
A weakness.
Yep.
And then maybe white would attack that. At some point, black would try to defend. Maybe it could keep up with the defense, maybe not. And then white switches to something else, another attack. Instead, we got down to where it's just an exchange, but white has the same option still.
Sure, yep. So black has a choice to make now.
Yeah. So undoubling white's pawns probably isn't the best.
Right. Yeah.
On the queen side, it's 2 against 2.
Yep.
On the king side, it's 4 against 3, and white's g-pawns are doubled.
Yep.
So you might like to keep it that way. And since white's king can be assertive and gain an initiative, move into the center, that's how black played king to f7, does the same thing.
Right. And now, I mean, certainly, well, yeah, I won't talk about that. Danila plays his rook down to d8. One of the things you like to do at any point in the game, if you can, is get your rook on the 7th rank, because it attacks all the pawns that are on the 7th, and if the king is back here, it keeps it back there. So I think Danila would like to, put his rook here and here, and just take control of the 7th. So it's, I think, what he's looking to do.
There's not a lot for black to do. He's passive, and so he doesn't really have a way to move his bishop and improve it. His king can't really improve. If he tries to chase the rook, it's a lot faster. It'll go finding pawns. And so he made kind of a waiting move on to g6.
But again, this is with the help of the engine, and we've got plenty of time here. Is the engine recommended that the king go to e6, and I think it's just because, with the idea of activating the king, because the king can come here and then maybe come in here, and by doing this instead, you're going to see what happens is that king's going to end up getting cut off completely. So I think right here in this position, like black's probably last chance to really get back in the game would have been to activate the king. So
you can imagine that if there were no queenside pawns, and this king could walk his way up here,
it's probably
there are no pawns on the H and F files, he could have a pretty cozy home, right?
Right.
Or at least be able to advance his pawns and start trading off some pawns and taking away white's threats, longer range threats. But not here.
So that g6 might have been the nail in the coffin, because Danila now plays rook to h8, hitting the h pawn. And probably the best thing Danila could have done would have just been to push.
Joaquin, yeah.
Joaquin, thank you.
I mean, there's not a lot of good choices. Playing h5 would have meant that the rook went over there for nothing. It's closer to the white pawns. Maybe there'll be some trades. It'll intercept them. But instead, he played king to g7 on 37th move, attacking the rook. But, of course, the rook is very fast.
Right. So now Danila plays rook to c8, and he's probably going to accomplish his goal of getting the rook on the 7th.
I don't see any way to stop it, Dave.
Right. Yeah, exactly, because like you said, it's a dark square, and with the light square bishop, you know, white can put pieces on the dark squares and not have to worry about them.
So in response, black played e4.
Which makes sense, right? Because
A little bit. He maybe can play f5 and make a long pawn chain, maybe keep black's king pushed back.
right,
Only problem is not the only, it seems like maybe a hopeful offensive move. The problem is this bishop
Yeah.
does not guard that queening square.
Right.
And so eventually it's going to get picked off.
right, right. But it's probably his only hope.
It's his only
He's
hope.
got a passed pawn.
Right.
He can do something possibly with it. The other downside is, you know, now it blocks, you know, blocks in this bishop. But I'd say it's, you know, if you're black right now, you're pretty
are you doing?
desperate. Yeah. So where are we?
39.
39, thank you. Yeah, so now Danila plays rook to c7, check, and black really doesn't have, I mean, black could do this to not get trapped in the back rank, but then I think white's
I
going to
would
just do that.
Absolutely.
And boy, that's really getting dangerous. He's got no place to go. So he opts for the lesser of two evils
Yeah.
and
He played back to g8.
to g8.
On 39th move.
Yeah, so now we can point out that this king is like out of the game, right? He's locked into the back rank by the rook. So I would love to have been Danila in this position. You know, it's like black's king is out of the game.
Sure.
And I'm just going to start walking around with mine at will, which is what he does. King to f2. Like you say, just stays on the dark
He
squares.
could have done that a lot, but he sets up black into the most passive position he could get in.
Right.
So took care of that first, and now
Right.
he does the king walk, which he could do anytime.
Yeah,
Okay, so black answered with h5 on the 40th move, and again, it's sort of a waiting move. There's not a lot to be done.
right. I wouldn't want to be black here. And white just continues with the king, activating the king. King to e3.
So the pawn's threatened, but easily guarded by the
Yeah.
bishop. He followed through with f5, double protecting it in case the bishop ever thought of going somewhere. Not a lot of prospects. He sets up a white square pawn chain, but it's kind of tough because he's got a white square bishop. So
Right.
you don't want your bishop on the same color as your pawns. They're in your way.
They're in your way, exactly, yeah. So his next move, again, he just keeps walking with the king. King to d4, right in the center.
And it's like inevitability.
Yeah,
So now that these pawns have been pushed forward on black's king side, and the h pawn is no longer on h7 to be taken, black played king to f8, which is another waiting move.
yeah.
It's painful.
It is, yeah. And so white just continues bringing the king to the queen side, king to c3.
So I don't remember variations, but it looks to me like he'll play b3, force a trade of those pawns is one option.
Okay,
I don't know if it's a good idea because this a4 pawn is in this bishop's way anyhow, so it's limiting its scope. It could be that he wants to come up and attack the pawn and bring the rook back and around and sacrifice.
yeah, I mean.
There's a lot of options.
Yeah, white's got all the options, and black can just sit and shuffle his pieces.
Also, he played a lot of these moves like a minute at a time, so there's no risk to these moves.
Right.
He can play them quickly, also use the clock as a bit of a weapon, maybe drive your opponent's time towards zero.
Yep.
Yeah, it's rough. So, seeing that maybe white could maybe try to do something about the a pawn, black played bishop to d5. So now black double protects the b3 square.
Yep. And again, white just keeps on coming. King to b4. Yep.
And in response, the only way to keep the pawn is to put the bishop back on c6. And at this point, white is ahead on the clock by 15 minutes.
Wow.
But it's still 38 to 23, so there's really no chance of either person flagging at the moment.
Yep.
But if it continues like this, it won't matter. This is winning position.
Do you know what the time control was?
No, I think it might have been 40 moves and 90 or
minutes.
2 hours probably, based on the first move time tag.
So roughly, yeah. So
And then there was a sudden death after that, because they just went up by 30 minutes just a moment ago.
So they roughly, each player roughly had 2 hours.
Two
right,
and a half, so could be 5, I think, total.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So right now they've been at it for, looks like about, I don't know, 4 hours total.
Okay. Okay.
And I think there's a delay built in.
Okay. So it's a very slow time control in any event. Players have plenty of time. Now the thing, white just has the freedom to do whatever he wants. King to c4, now he's going to switch towards the other side.
So, okay, we've said it a few times, there's not much to do. Black plays b5 check, which is a little bit, I don't know about desperate, but there's really nothing to do. And now this bishop is not protected, so he's going to be moving that bishop next.
Right.
And the king is going to do whatever he wants still.
Right.
And now the bishop is going to be maybe up against the back rank with the king and pinned, at which point white does more.
Yeah. So it really is desperation. The king goes to d4, and just look at all of black's pawns are on the light squares, which is the square of his bishop, which is horrible. It's the opposite of what you want.
Yeah.
If all the pawns were on dark squares, he might still have a game, but this is the worst of all worlds for black.
Well, his response was bishop to e8.
Right.
So now it's protected by the king, and the rook is now not attacking it, has the open c file, has the 7th rank.
And so now the king can just move in and start making threats this way. King to e5. I would not want to have been black here.
Yeah. There's not a lot to do. Black played e3. I don't even know.
Right.
I mean, they can't do much. It's not going to be a queen because the rook can chase it down and then come back and do everything else we talked about.
Yeah. So it's basically, like we said, black is just totally desperate at this point. And now white plays king to f6. So now we're getting into the realm of possible mating.
Right, there are mate threats. If let's see, in a fantasy variation, this rook could get around and come back here.
And it's checkmate.
It's checkmate.
Yeah.
It's pretty tight.
Yeah.
Black cannot block because there's nobody else protecting the bishop, so there's no way to stop that rook if he wanted to. Instead, he protected this h7 square with his king.
Right. Yeah.
With king g8.
And now, but unfortunately, that allows white to play rook to c8, pinning the bishop.
And the bishop can't move.
Can't move,
That's an illegal move.
Yeah.
And so the king has to go back to f8 to protect that bishop.
Yep. Boy, I would love to have been white in this position. So now he plays rook to c3, hitting the pawn.
Well, another back and forth tempo move. There's nothing to do.
Yep.
I mean, if the bishop maybe was more active and had been in front of these pawns, maybe he could anchor that pawn here and force white to pay attention to it.
Right.
And of course, it would be maybe committing a rook and a king to do that.
Right.
In which case, black wouldn't have been pinned to the back rank, and black could advance.
Sure. Yep.
And maybe white would trade that bishop and pawn for his rook.
Yep.
And we'd have a different game totally.
Yeah.
But we don't.
We don't. And so now Danila just takes the pawn on e3. So now he's just up the straight exchange. They've each got 3 pawns.
Right. So black's last move was king f8. There wasn't really much to do with the bishop. If it moves to either c6 or d7, the white rook could attack it and then make its tempos on its way towards one of those checkmate threats we talked about.
Right. And his final move is a nice move, just to basically make the point that black has nothing to do. Rook to d3, at which point
Right.
black resigned and Danila became the mass state champion. We could show a couple more moves, I guess. The point is that I'll pretend I'm George. What do we call this sort of situation? Where,
I think you're getting at zugzwang.
yes, yes.
So what he's driving at is, again, this bishop could move. Here it would be
Yeah.
taken. Here it would be attacked. If the king could move again, in which case this rook would pin that bishop again,
Yeah,
and the king would have to go back to protect it.
right.
And now, having set up this position, whereas instead of it being white's move, he could just sidestep one move. And this bishop is still pinned. It's still illegal to move it off the diagonal,
Yeah.
off the back rank. And you can see that the king is in opposition with the white king, meaning that it can't advance.
Right,
It then has, again, the only move available,
right.
g8,
To lose the bishop,
and then he would lose that bishop.
or else you
with
could
check.
start pushing pawns forward and losing pawns. So,
Yeah,
so zugzwang means
the compulsion to move.
compulsion to move, and your best move, if it was legal, would be to pass.
Right.
Every move makes your position worse, and that's where black has found himself now.
And the beauty of it is it's easier to do here with the rook because the rook can change color squares.
Right.
It can do vertical and horizontal moves. It's not compelled to just be on one color.
Right.
And so it's very good at wasting
Yep.
tempi, right? It can do one move, it can do a square, it can do another square, it can go a third square, it can go back two. You can count how many times you might want to move in order to get the position you want, where black in this situation would be stuck to have to
Right.
move and lose that piece.
So yeah, so it was critical where he traded the rooks to be left with just a rook versus a
Sure.
bishop, right? Because now, when you're just stuck with the bishop, it's stuck on the same color all the time.
Right. If black had managed to keep more pieces on the board, even down in exchange,
Right.
at least maybe he could coordinate his own attack or poke at some of white's weaknesses, right? We talked about this g3 pawn is weak.
Yep.
It's hard to get to, right? The king could have protected it from h2, but at least there's some things you could take aim at.
Yeah.
But when it's down to the kings, some pawns, and one exchange,
Right.
it's tough.
Yeah, when the only piece you've got is the bishop, that can be a big problem.
Right.
Because
Now
like you say, it's stuck on one color all
Now,
the
the
time.
bishop is sometimes good at wasting time because it can move an odd or even number of squares
Sure.
on its diagonal. It's better than the knight. So that doesn't help here.
Right.
Right? The knight can move like a knight moves, but it can often be zugzwanged based on that, whereas the bishop maybe could sneak through some pawn structures. None of that exists here. He's behind all of his pawns.
Right. Yep. So we've come down to
Set the record.
we set the record for early finish here. Let's see. Is there anything else in George's notes? I think we've covered all the basics of the Mass Open. Oh, I think I said, yeah, 233 players, 5 sections. So that's a pretty good turnout.
I guess that wasn't a record,
It's not a
but
record.
it's still pretty full.
That's still good. I saw, I think a couple of years ago, they had 254. So in any event, that's a good number.
I mean, I went to one of the days to watch for an hour, and when you walk in, it certainly seems full.
Yep.
Right? I think I happened at a time when some of the other rounds, the lower sections, had finished. They play a little faster,
Right.
and so it wasn't a full house. But when you walk through the door, and there are all the upper section, championship section, and the under 2100 and the next sections are still pretty full.
Yep.
Those games tend to go quite a while, even if club players aren't that as good as the Open, it's usually pretty thoughtful and try to
Right.
grind out something in a long, especially a long time control like this.
Yep. Yep. So you want to talk about what's going on at the club, I
Yeah,
guess?
why don't we?
So I guess one thing I should point out that Mike does to go above and beyond the normal. He runs all the club tournaments, but he's also been putting on monthly, almost monthly, sometimes either a rapid tournament or a blitz tournament, which have been getting pretty good turnouts.
Yeah, I mean, at first, the quick rated ones, which I think would, let's say game in 15 to simplify it, would draw 15 to 20 players, and the blitz would be a few less. Maybe, it always lagged. The blitz events always lagged in participation. But blitz has caught up, and we've even had one tournament, I forget which time control it was, where I think there were 31 or 2 players.
Yeah, that was one of the blitz ones, right?
I think so.
Like last month, I think, wasn't it?
So,
Yeah.
People not just from the club come, but from all around. There was a player, we had a tournament Saturday, and one of the players, his dad drove him. I don't know if he lives here now, but his registration is from New York. He used to at least lived there.
Yep.
We've had players at our club who currently live in Florida, and they come back and still visit.
Yep.
But on the weekends, it's generally southern New Hampshire, central and eastern Mass.
Yep.
Occasional, we had a player who plays down toward Rhode Island this past weekend.
Okay.
So it seems like there's some appetite.
Yep. Yep. And since we still have time, I remembered. So I'm going to show this surprise to Darren. Let's see. Yeah, there's the camera. So anyway, on 2 past episodes, when it was appropriate, I wore this shirt, and we were supposed to talk about it so that the audience didn't just think I was a slob coming in a T-shirt. And what this is it's an outline of Iceland, where I've traveled to. Beautiful country. And the point of the T-shirt is it's got Knight H5 on it, which is some people call it the turning point of the Fischer-Spassky World Championship. It was the 3rd game. And Knight H5 was a very risky move, and at that point in the match, Fischer was down 2-0. He had lost the first game, and he had forfeited the second game, so he's down 2-0. And in 5 previous games, he had, I think, 3 losses and 2 draws against Spassky, so he had never won. And anyway, game 3 was the game that he won, his first victory, to make it 2-1. And then the rest is history. So anyway, that's the relevance of that shirt that I've worn twice. I wore it, I think, last month because Olafsson, the Icelandic Grandmaster, had just passed away, and so we were doing a show as a tribute to him. So that's the relevance of that shirt.
Now, is this purchase on a trip to Iceland? Did you?
I think I purchased it. I didn't purchase it when I went to Iceland. I think I got it from the World Chess Hall of Fame. Yeah, I ordered it online from the Hall of Fame in St. Louis.
Now, did your trip to Iceland include tourist things, or was there chess involved?
It was strictly tourist stuff. The only slightly chess thing that happened, which is only known to me, is there was one day, and the trip was happening just as COVID was starting to clear. It was sort of that period where it was like, it seemed like it might be safe to travel again, and then I think shortly after it was like not safe. But anyway, we had a tour of the capital, and unfortunately, I guess it would typically be a walking tour, but we were in a bus, we were masked up. But I happened to notice at one point when we were driving, I saw the hall where the championship had been. And like, I'm probably the only one on the bus who realized what that hall was or cared. And they didn't even point it out, but I tried to get a quick picture as we were driving by. So that's the only chess-related thing that happened on that trip. But it's an absolutely beautiful country. I would go there again in a heartbeat.
I'm going to go back to the club. Please do. So we are several weeks from the end of our regular season. We're in the middle of the Wayne L. Stedman Memorial Tournament. Wayne was a longtime member who came to the club.
Yep.
Most guys at the club, most men and women, are just there for the fun of it, and they love chess. It's not like they're trying to be a master or anything.
Right.
That was like Wayne. He was always there, good attendance. Yep. And even though when I first met him, he was an older man, he was still hard. People have become kind of tough nuggets, and he was that kind of guy.
Yeah.
So then we'll have 2 more tournaments until the club championship.
Okay.
One is for, well, they're both for recently departed club members. The next one is for Larry Spencer, who passed suddenly a little
Right.
while ago. And then right after he passed, Dave Thomas passed.
Right.
So we're going to have 2 tournaments in their honor. That'll end our regular season.
Yep.
Year to year, our qualification criteria changes for our club championship. This year, it's just based on how many points you accumulate, where wins are 1 and draws are a half.
Right.
And the top 16 will qualify for the club championship, which will begin first Wednesday after Labor Day, I think.
Okay.
So it's taken shape. There's still, we have a lot of people. When I first started at Wachusett, maybe 10 years ago, there were 30 to 40 players a week, and it would peak and then it would fall back. But now we are registering low 50s,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sometimes we push 60. They don't all come the same night,
Right.
and then we'll see maybe 40 or 45 a week. And so whereas we had bunching at the cutoff, the threshold for getting into a championship in the past, now that same thing is happening with double the number of people in the mix. So it's nice that a lot of the club, a big percentage of the club, has a stake in how it's going. It's that it'll come down to the wire, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I know that you're a generally humble person, but I mean, credit does have to go to you for really running well-organized tournaments, and well-organized, friendly. I have to say, in general, there's very few issues anyway, but anytime that there have been any issues, I feel like, really, honestly, you've handled them very well, very diplomatically. I mean, typically if there's been any kind of minor issue, you send out an email just mentioning this is expected behavior, and I think, just word gets around that this is just a good place to play chess.
Maybe.
And
I mean, a lot of times people, like I say, they're just invested in their game, they're into chess.
Right.
They maybe forget stuff.
Right.
And so there's really no reason to call somebody out when you could just give a little reminder to the
Right,
group,
exactly.
and nobody can take it personally.
Yeah.
It works out fine.
yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me that they just finished Norway chess.
Right.
And it's funny because even people outside of chess were mentioning this to me. Magnus Carlsen, the #1 player in the world, had just lost a game to the world champion Gukesh, and he just slammed his fist on the table, which I think we all get, right? It's like you're just so focused on the game, you're so intent on it, especially if it's a game where you were winning.
He was.
And then suddenly you lose. There's just, it gets very intense. But he, apologized like almost immediately. I saw like as he was leaving the stage, he patted Gukesh on the shoulder. I think he probably apologized, but it's funny because that's the sort of thing that, makes social media.
It does.
People outside the chess world see that,
In comparison to maybe some famous tennis explosions we might have seen, or what you see on a football field
Right,
or
yeah.
wherever, it was
Pretty mild.
and pretty brief,
Yeah.
but it got noticed.
Yep. So anyway, yeah, so kudos to you. That's the end of our show. We made it.
We did it.
So stay tuned next month. Possibly George will be here. We hope he's going to be here, but it can be a long recovery, so we're going to have to wait and see.
We'll wait and see.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you doing
You're
this.
welcome.
And thanks to
Happy to
Darren
help.
and Brian. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.